Hello everybody, I'm Dawn. Welcome to my channel. Thank you so much for visiting with me today. In this video, we are going to discuss a very unbelievable case, but a true case. It is a disturbing story with a shocking, incredible ending, and I am going to issue a warning right now. The details of this case may be very troubling for some viewers. So if you are super sensitive, you might want to skip this one. This story shows human depravity, but also strength of the human spirit. Now, this is the story of Alison Botha. Alison was born on September 22nd, 1967 in Port Elizabeth, South Africa, to Brian and Claire. Alison had an older brother, Neil. When she was 10, her parents got divorced, but she still had a very good childhood. She attended the Collegiate High School for Girls, where she wasn't very academically inclined, but despite that, still became head girl. She was very popular, well-liked, outgoing, kind, and people loved her. After she graduated high school, she attended a secretarial program for a year and then traveled the world for 4 years before moving back to Port Elizabeth. On December 18th, 1994, she was hanging out with a group of friends at the beach, and later they decided to go to Alison's place to hang out, have pizza, play games. Around 1 o'clock in the morning, Alison drove her friend Kim home, and when she got back to her place, her usual parking spot was taken, but she found another spot a little further away, but still walking distance. It was a spot under a tree with obscured lighting. A man by the name of Franz DeToy approached the driver's side of her car, and now let's talk about him for a bit. Franz was born on July 6, 1968. His father was a police officer, and his family was very devout. By the time Franz was a teenager, he was a troublemaker, hanging out with the wrong crowd, drugs, arson. He actually set his school on fire, which he got expelled for, and that was when he was in the 8th grade. And he blamed heavy metal music for his actions. After his expulsion, his family moved to Port Elizabeth, where he would meet a girl that claimed to be a supernatural witch, and she introduced him to Satanism and worshiping the devil. And to me, this is odd because although I am not into witchcraft, I do read a lot and go down rabbit holes, and witches associated with Satanism is more of a plot device for movies, and it's a general belief, but not really wholly true. Witches, or the Wiccan religion, predates the idea of the devil. Now, not all witches are Wiccan, but those who consider themselves real witches don't worship the devil. There's no devil in it. At least that's been where my studies have led me. But that's all for another video, and we might talk about it one day. At the time, Franz was only about 15 years old, and he ended up dropping out of school. So his parents made him join the Army, and he was in the Army for a few years. While in the Army, he spent most of his time in trouble and ended up leaving the Army when he was 20. He got married shortly after separating from the Army and had a daughter, but he left his wife and daughter soon after. He worked various jobs, but couldn't really hold down any gainful employment. He got married again and had a son, but he didn't really like working, so decided to try petty crime because he's worthless, a worthless sack. He would always run to his parents for help, and his police officer father would always bail him out of, jams and tough situations. So back to that December night, he approached the driver's side of Alison's car, opened the door, held a knife to her throat, and told her to move over or he would kill her. And he then got in the driver's seat, and he told her he didn't want to hurt her. He just wanted to use her car for an hour. They made small talk. She was terrified. She tried to get him to let her go, but he wouldn't. She actually contemplated jumping out of the car, but was afraid. He said he needed to meet up with someone, and he still said he wasn't going to hurt her. But then he stopped and picked up another man, and that was Thenis Kruger. Now, let me tell you a little bit about him. Thenis also grew up in Port Elizabeth, but he wasn't as fortunate as Franz and wasn't born into a good family. By the time he was 9 months old, his mother had been married 3 times, and the third one was a charm. He allegedly physically, and it is also rumored sexually, abused Thenis for years. When Thenis was 15, he dropped out of school, and he joined the army at some point, but was separated shortly after. He got out at 18. But it is said while in the army, he showed his violent tendencies. And at 19, he met a 26-year-old Franz, and they would become literal partners in crime. On December 4th, 1994, just a few weeks before meeting Alison Botha, they assaulted a 21-year-old pregnant woman. She went to the police and reported it, and they were arrested, but they were released after being interviewed. And if the police would have kept them in jail, Alison would have been safe from them. And this wasn't Fran's first arrest for assault on a woman, but they still let them go. It's possible Fran's police officer father had something to do with this release, but we don't know for sure. Franz drove them to a secluded location. Again, I want to give a trigger warning. This next section will be pretty upsetting. It is violent and graphic, but I will try to make it palatable. They told Alison they were going to RAPE her after making her take her clothes off. So they R-worded her in the back of her car, first Franz, then Thenis. Thenis did so while his hands were around her neck, choking her. After the essay, or the assault, the two creeps discussed whether or not they should kill her. And while talking, they used each other's names, and Alison heard this. This is an important detail. They knew they had to kill her because the last 2 women went to the police, and Franz was caught the first time, and they were both caught the second time. So they were on the radar. Franz pulled Alison out of the car into the dirt and started strangling her. He's strangling her so forcefully that he crushes her windpipe, and she passed out. Then Franz started stabbing Alison over and over again in her lower abdomen, at least 35 times. But Alison is amazingly still alive. So Franz takes a knife and starts slicing at Alison's throat over and over again, 16 times. He slit through her windpipe, and remember, he crushed her windpipe when he was choking her earlier. But now he created a hole for her to breathe from. Alison is still alive, but she plays dead in hopes that they will leave. So they think there's no way she's alive, and they do leave. They get in her car, they throw out all her clothes, and take off. Alison was just clinging to life. She wasn't done fighting. She thought she could not let these two get away with this. And she remembered their names and has the wherewithal to use her fingers to write their names in the sand. And she also wrote, "I love Mom." As she laid there, not dying, some force out there was in her favor and did not want her to die. Somehow she found the strength to get up on her hands and knees, but felt a lot of wetness, and she was disemboweled. She grabs her shirt that was thrown out of the car and used it to hold her intestines. She slowly was able to stand, but realized something wasn't right. The moon was full and it was pretty bright out, but she was not able to see. But she saw nothing. So she took her free hand to touch her head, but there was nothing there. And she realized her head was hanging back because Franz nearly decapitated her. It was then she lifted up her head with her other hand and held it on her neck. She slowly struggled to walk with one hand holding her shirt that was holding her intestines in and the other hand supporting her head. She walked until she reached the main road. She had no more strength and collapsed and waited for someone to find her. A car approached, giving her hope, but they took off. But another car came by and did stop for her. The second car was a group of college students from Johannesburg, and they were on vacation. One of the passengers was a veterinarian student. They were able to call for an ambulance, and the veterinarian student, his name is T.N. Eilard. He sees that Alison's thyroid is exposed, and he tucks it back into her body. And he's doing a great job in keeping her alive and staying with her. but they're waiting and waiting for the ambulance. They wait a long time. Tian stays with Alison. After 2 hours, the ambulance arrives, and Alison is losing every bit of will to hold on, and Tian stayed with her in the ambulance and rode to the hospital with her. At the hospital, she was immediately brought into surgery, and everyone is shocked at her resilience. They could not believe she was still alive. Dr. Alexander Angelov said he had never seen such severe injuries in his 16 years of practice in medicine. And she was bloody, covered in dirt. Her wounds obviously very serious, and the dirt was on her intestines and everything. So she had to be completely cleaned up to try to prevent sepsis. Also, all the slashes to her throat missed her major arteries, and the 35 stab wounds missed her vital organs. That's incredible luck. She was stabbed 35 times and her throat was slashed at 16 times, and no vital organs or arteries were severed. She was in the operating room for hours, and Tian, remember the veterinarian student, he's still there waiting for her to get out of surgery. Alison woke up a few hours after she went to ICU after her extensive surgeries. I can't believe it. It was just a few hours and she awoke. I would have thought they'd put her in a medically induced coma, but I mean, they would know better than me, but I just thought they would have, but they didn't. Alison needs to speak to the police, but she can't talk. She can't use her voice because she has a tube down her throat helping to keep her alive. But she was able to write down the names of her attackers, as well as write information about the attack, a lot of details. But the police needed Alison to speak the names of her attackers, which seems ridiculous to me. They stood there and watched her write the names, but she needed to speak them, if possible. She made the doctors remove the tube so she could say their names, and there was no way she was letting them get away with what they had done to her and go and do it to someone else. Saying their first names was enough, and the police were able to find them. Franz and Thanes didn't believe this was about Alison because as far as they were concerned, she was dead. They didn't believe there was any way she could have survived that attack, but she did. And imagine their shock when the police told them Alison was alive, and she told them everything. And they both know they were caught, so they actually gave full confessions and were both kept in jail this time. Thank God. Alison had more surgeries, but was released from the hospital just less than 2 weeks later. She still had to continue to be seen in the hospital for wound care and more procedures, but she still had a long road ahead of her outside of the hospital. She moved back in with her mom so she could help take care of her. Alison did have to go in to identify the attackers in a lineup, and she did that. Now, up until this point, victims in South Africa had to actually come face to face with their attackers and identify them by putting a hand on the attacker's shoulder. Alison didn't have to do that. This was the first time in that country a victim was able to identify the attackers through one-way glass, where the victim would not be seen and would not have to come into contact with the attackers and touch them. I imagine that would be pretty traumatic. On December 29th, 2024, Franz and Thanes appeared in magistrate court, where the judge ordered them to undergo 30 days of psychiatric evaluation. On June 12th, 1995, the trial starts, and Franz's wife stood by him through the whole thing. Franz testified during the trial and said he was possessed by the devil. That's why he did it. Nice try, idiot. Thanes, however, did not take the stand. They were both found guilty, and Franz was sentenced to 3 life sentences, and Thanes was sentenced to 1 life sentence. Which that doesn't really make sense to me. Why didn't they both get the same sentence? I guess because Thanes didn't participate in the stabbing, but he was there for it and a willing participant. Alison, understandably, had a very hard time even after her physical recovery. She went through a deep depression, but she later met a man, fell in love, and got married. But doctors had told her she would not ever be able to get pregnant and carry a baby to term. But she did and had a healthy baby boy. A few years later, she was pregnant again and had another healthy baby boy. And Tian, the veterinarian student hero that we talked about earlier, after his experience with Alison, he decided to go to medical school and become a doctor for people rather than a veterinarian. So he did that, and he actually helped deliver Alison's second baby. Alison has dedicated her life to advocacy. She wrote a book about her attack and survival and has become a motivational speaker. She took part in a documentary about her experience. It's called Alison, and it is on Amazon Prime. Check it out. And she's also written 2 books. Franz and Thenis never showed any remorse. And in July 2023, they were both released from prison, not even serving 30 years of their life sentences. Although it's disgusting that her attackers are free out there to attack again after spending almost 30 years in prison learning how to become better criminals, this story is still inspiring. Alison survived a horrific assault and was able to nail her assailants. It's still so amazing to me that she survived this and was able to speak her attackers' names despite her throat being slashed 16 times. To me, this is an incredible story of bravery, perseverance, and survival. Alison is a true role model. She is revered worldwide for her motivational speeches. She has spoken in more than 35 countries, and she has inspired other survivors to come forward and tell their stories. Thank you so much for sitting with me today. This was a really difficult story to research because the violence is so horrific, but then it becomes inspiring with her recovery, and to me, that's beautiful. But thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to everyone later. Bye.